Day 114 of the war in Gaza, and the battlefield remains focused on the southern Gaza Hamas stronghold in Khan Yunis, now fully encircled by IDF troops. The war cabinet is reportedly edging toward approving an IDF push toward Rafah on the Egyptian border. Throughout the weekend, IDF troops battled Hamas operatives in Khan Yunis as airstrikes pounded RPG-wielding cells attempting to confront Israeli forces. The complete control of the city above ground is reportedly only days away. Much work still needs to be done to neutralize the maze of terror tunnels under the city, where Hamas leadership is still operating. The IDF is saying that the next strategic goal would be the capture of Rafah and control of the entire Philadelphia route along the Gaza-Egyptian border. That move awaits a decision from the War Cabinet, expected in the coming days. Fighting continued deep within Khan Yunis, with ground forces of the 98th Division killing dozens of Hamas gunmen. The Air Force carried out a wave of strikes hitting apartments used by operatives, weapons depots, observation posts, and staging grounds. Defense Minister Gallant said that more than 100 Hamas operatives have been captured by Israeli troops in Gaza in recent days, including some who surrendered after hiding in tunnels. As the ground offensive expands, the IDF called on residents of several neighborhoods in western Khan Yunis to evacuate to the nearby Al-Mawasi area in southern Gaza. Masses of Palestinians were seen fleeing combat areas in western Khan Yunis. Images showed thousands of civilians fleeing the city on foot while chanting "Down with Hamas" and calling for the end of the Hamas terror group's rule. Addressing the nation, Prime Minister Netanyahu tied Holocaust Remembrance Day to the ICJ ruling and the ongoing war in Gaza.
אזרחי ישראל, היום הוא יום השואה הבינלאומי. אין אבסורד גדול יותר מכך שדווקא אתמול, ערב יום השואה הבינלאומי, היו מי שבאו להאג להאשים אותנו בהאשמה השקרית והמקוממת של רצח עם. בשם מי הם באו? בשם החמאס, בשם הנאצים החדשים שבאו לבצע בנו רצח עם. אני מחזיק כאן את הספר של היטלר בערבית, Mein Kampf. את הספר הזה מצאו לוחמינו בבתים של אזרחים ברצועת עזה. הם מצאו שם ספרות אנטישמית ונאצית נרחבת.
They deny the kidnapping of our children, the murder of our grandchildren, the rape of our daughters. The new Nazis we face today will stop at nothing to destroy civilization as we know it. The World Jewish Congress was created exactly for these times like this, so every Jew can fall asleep at night knowing they are safe in their own home. We are a voice for the Jewish people everywhere. We are the World Jewish Congress.
American-led negotiators are reportedly edging closer to an agreement in which Israel would suspend the war in Gaza for about 2 months in exchange for the release of more than 100 hostages still held by Hamas. According to the New York Times, the deal could be sealed within weeks. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Negotiators reportedly developed a written draft agreement merging proposals offered by Israel and Hamas into basic framework that was the subject of talks today in Paris. The directors of the Israeli Mossad, Shabak, the US CIA, and the head of the Egyptian intelligence and the Qatari prime minister are all taking part in the high-level talks. While there are still important disagreements to be worked out, negotiations are reportedly cautiously optimistic that a final accord is within reach. The White House says that President Biden spoke about the hostage issue with the Emir of Qatar.
We're doing everything we can to bring these moms and dads, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters back home to their families. Our thoughts remain with them, and of course their loved ones, as well as all the innocent Palestinians that continue to be caught up in this war that Hamas and Mr. Sinwar started on the 7th of October.
Prime Minister Netanyahu was sounding skeptical about the Qatari role as mediators.
קטר מארחת את ראשי החמאס, היא גם מממנת את החמאס, יש לה מנופים על החמאס. היא התחייבה לדאוג א' שהתרופות יגיעו למחוזותיהם, זאת אומרת לחטופים שלנו, והיא גם אמרה שהיא יכולה לעזור להחזיר אותם. אז יועילו להפעיל את הלחצים שלהם, ויפעילו, הם שמו את עצמם כמתווכת, בבקשה, יואילו להוכיח את זה ולהחזיר את חטופינו ולהביא את התרופות בינתיים אליהם.
According to reports, in the first stage of the agreement, fighting would cease for 6 weeks, with Israeli children, women, and elderly released. In return, Israel would free Palestinian security prisoners and expand aid to Gaza. In the next stage, Hamas would release Israeli female soldiers and male soldiers, followed by bodies of hostages. In exchange, during the pause in fighting, Hamas would receive an international guarantee for a permanent end of the war.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
The IDF has been holding drills simulating war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. After months of daily cross-border clashes and repeated warnings, Israel has lost patience with diplomatic efforts to end the fighting. Paratrooper and engineering forces from the IDF carried out intensive training drills at the IDF's Northern Command, preparing troops for combat in winter weather conditions and in the northern terrain. The drills further combine tanks, combat engineering, infantry, and artillery forces. The IDF announced that despite the winter weather, the rain, the mud, and the fog, and after 114 days of defending the northern border, this week the IDF carried out a series of difficult and complex exercises to strengthen the brigade's readiness. The troops are ready for anything. Over the weekend, Hezbollah attacks continued. Air defense intercepted numerous launches identified crossing from Lebanon. An anti-tank missile launched from Lebanon hit a resident's home in Moshav Avivim. There were no casualties in the incident. In response, the IDF launched a wave of strikes on Hezbollah targets across South Lebanon. So far, the skirmishes on the border have resulted in 6 civilian Israeli deaths, as well as the deaths of 9 IDF soldiers and reservists. Hezbollah has named 171 members who have been killed by Israel during the ongoing clashes. And joining us now with the latest security updates on Israel's multi-front war is the director of the International Institute of Counterterrorism, Colonel Miri Eisen. Colonel, welcome. Miri, there is optimism regarding a potential new deal for a pause in fighting in exchange for the release of Israeli hostages. Do you get the sense that we are indeed approaching a deal, and at what cost to Israel?
I think we're approaching a deal. Israel needs the deal, not just in that sense, Hamas. What are the price? The price is what we're going to have to give out. I don't think of it as optimism. I think of it as something that needs to be done. We all need the hostages back. The price is going to be one that Israelis and worldwide are going to be horrified by, terrorists with blood on their hands. It's the only way to get the hostages back.
Miri, IDF troops have reportedly encircled Khan Yunis, and it could be only a matter of days before the city, at least above ground, is fully under Israeli control. Is the next target likely to be Rafah on the Egyptian border? It's crucial to control what enters and exits Gaza, isn't it? What are we waiting for?
Rafah on the Israeli-Egyptian border is an area that now pretty much has almost 2 million people. In that sense, what Israel did, systematically working from north to south, has pushed an enormous amount of people into a very condensed area. When you're acting militarily inside an area that has an enormous amount of civilians, this whole aspect of trying to avoid civilian casualties becomes literally really, really hard, and it's hard enough right now. I do want to remind everybody that in our doing what we're doing in Khan Yunis, in our controlling Khan Yunis, it's still similar to what happened in the northern Gaza Strip. There used to be 600,000 people, and now there are only 200,000 people, but there are still hundreds of thousands of people there. The terrorists themselves can still use that underground subterranean arena. It isn't that we're conquering it and everything's done. That is not the way this war is because of the way that Hamas built themselves.
Colonel, Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich said yesterday that the day after in Gaza would likely mean an Israeli military government, and he does not rule out the idea of the resettlement of Gush Katif by Israelis. Is there no better alternative for the day after, or is that a potential outcome?
In the government right now, you have 7 different political parties, both those that initially started this government from really January of 2023, and those who joined because of the war. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, represents only one political party. That is his opinion. That is not the opinion of the government. I myself served under a government that had 7 different parties, and they can all say what they want. That's not the government decision. There are a lot of other options. That would be the one that he says, but I do not see that as being the one that the government chooses.
Finally, I'd like to ask you this. The IDF has been conducting drills in the north in preparation for a potential war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Would you be surprised by an Israeli ground maneuver now, or at least in the coming period?
I think that we all have to understand that just like this war is going on against Hamas down south, and it impacts the capability for Israelis to return to their homes, there are tens of thousands of Israelis, including a full city of 24,000 people, Kiryat Shmone, that cannot return to their houses, to their homes, into that city, amongst others. Israel has to make a choice. How do people move back in when you still have the absolute direct threat on the border, not just of the different Hezbollah anti-tank guided missiles, suicide drones, rockets and mortars, but of the potential of a ground attack of the Radwan forces, similar to what we saw on October 7th. I don't see how we can avoid it, even though I'm not looking forward to the idea.
Colonel Miri Eisen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all.
And the storm surrounding the United Nations Relief Organization for the Palestinians, called UNRWA, continues as many EU countries joined the United States, the UK, Australia, and Canada in pausing funding to the United Nations aid agency after it was revealed that a dozen UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th rampage.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres vowed on Sunday to hold to account any UN employee involved in acts of terror, after it was revealed that some refugee agency staffers were directly involved in the October 7th Hamas attack against Israeli civilians. In a statement, the UN chief said that any UN employee involved in acts of terror will be held accountable, including through criminal prosecution. On Friday, it was revealed that 12 UNRWA staffers were directly involved in the October 7th massacre. Of the 12 staffers, Guterres said that 9 had been fired, 1 was confirmed dead, and the identities of the other 2 were being clarified. Yet this revelation follows numerous other allegations of UNRWA complicity with the Hamas terrorist organization. In recent months, the IDF has uncovered numerous terror tunnels near UNRWA facilities. Hamas terrorists killed in Gaza were found to be carrying UNRWA ID badges. A Telegram group of 3,000 UNRWA teachers glorified the October 7th massacre, and there were allegations of an UNRWA teacher who even held one of the Israeli hostages captive in their home. Following the revelation, numerous countries announced they would halt funding to the organization. The UK, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Finland joined the United States, Australia, and Canada in pausing funding.
Yeah, we have suspended any outlying or yet to be allocated funds for UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency. Pending the results of this investigation, we're obviously going to watch this very closely. We welcome the UN Secretary General and the Commissioner General of UNRWA, their comments today calling for a full investigation.
Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz on Saturday night called on more nations to halt their funding, saying that UNRWA's ties with Hamas, providing refuge for terrorists, and perpetuating its rule are undeniable. He called on the leadership to resign and be investigated for their knowledge, and said UNRWA must be replaced with agencies dedicated to genuine peace and development.
The International Court of Justice meeting in The Hague declined to grant South Africa's appeal that it order an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. At the same time, the court found that there is a plausibility to South Africa's claims. In its decision in The Hague, in a 15-2 vote, judges found that there is plausibility to South Africa's claims that the rights of Palestinians were subjected to genocide and must be urgently protected. But crucially, the court did not use the word desist in its decision, which would have also indicated it believed that genocide was actively taking place. The court did not take the action most desired by South Africa and feared by Israel, that of ordering an immediate unilateral ceasefire, which could have stymied the war effort. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel remained committed both to international law and its just war started by the Hamas rampage.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people. Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected.
And joining us now with more on the International Court of Justice decision is Arsen Ostrovsky, attorney and CEO of the International Legal Forum. Thank you so much for joining us. So the International Court of Justice issued a decision on Friday. Can you break it down for us? Is this a win for Israel or a loss?
Sure. I mean, look, I think first of all, we have to put this in context. What we saw on Friday was not only a mockery of justice, but it was a gross travesty of justice and a perversion of the meaning of the word genocide. It is not Israel that ought to have been on trial, quite frankly, but Hamas. It is Hamas who has genocidal ambitions and intentions, which it acted out on October 7th when it committed these most heinous atrocities and crimes. In terms of whether the decision of the Court of Justice itself was a victory or not, that really depends on how we look at it. South Africa sought a number of different provisional measures or injunctions. They got a number of them, but the one which they really sought was a ceasefire. They did not receive. The court made a number of determinations, many of which were quite perhaps problematic. However, it did not order a ceasefire, and it did not compel Israel to halt its military operations. These will continue, and in that regard, I think that is a victory for the state of Israel.
And so, according to what you're saying, the court failed to throw out the case entirely, though. What will happen next?
So the court did not throw out the case entirely, as perhaps it ought to have. What it did say essentially was that there is some merit to South Africa's case, but that will need to be proved in substance at a hearing, with such hearing to be conducted perhaps in maybe 2 or 3 years' time. There's really no telling in terms of that. I mean, it ought not to have gone even to that stage, but I think that was inevitable given the composition of the court, given that the court itself is an organ of the United Nations. So I think we did expect that to some extent, but the court did not make any determinations as to the substance, really, of South Africa's case. That will be heard later. But we do need to underscore that not only did the court not compel Israel to cease its operations, but it did also importantly call for the release of hostages as well.
Slight change in direction. UNRWA. The UN has found UNRWA to be complicit in Hamas terror activity. So how can that same body be taken seriously when bringing Israel to a court for genocide? How can you even explain this?
Sure. I mean, UNRWA is the last organization in the world that ought to be taken seriously at all. UNRWA has become an indispensable and indistinguishable arm of Hamas. They are an incubator for relentless hatred, anti-Semitism, and incitement. We have seen UNRWA staff playing an active role and participating in the massacre of October 7th and the ongoing situation with the hostages of Israel that remain in Gaza. To this day, we have seen UNRWA textbooks glorifying hatred. We have seen UNRWA staff and employees glorifying Hitler and Nazism. We have seen Hamas rockets and weapons stored underneath the noses of UNRWA schools and facilities. UNRWA has no role to play whatsoever in the reconstruction of Gaza, and it is a positive step that a number of leading democracies, the US, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia, and others have taken to suspend funding to UNRWA based on these really disturbing allegations. But that is just one step in the right direction. Quite frankly, UNRWA must be defunded once and for all and disbanded.
Back to the ICJ, there was one judge from Uganda, the only woman judge from Uganda, Julia Sebutindi, who voted against every single measure brought by South Africa against Israel. How do you explain her vote, and is the case going to be bound to rule against us in the end?
That's a good question. I guess time will tell. Time will also tell if the case even goes towards the full hearing. Ultimately, depending on the way the operation in Gaza continues. The judge from Gaza, I mean, she really did stand out. You know, we sometimes say not all heroes wear capes, or perhaps some wear judges' robes. And she showed moral clarity. She showed an understanding of the rule of law, as well as the weight of history as well. And I suppose perhaps someone that comes from Africa that understands very well also the threat of such kind of attacks, what genocide really is, and also what it is not. So I think her outstanding dissenting opinions, where she voted against the proposals on every single measure, really do stand out, both for their moral clarity, for their judgment, as well as their application of international law as it ought to be applied in these circumstances.
Austin, thanks. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
In other news, Saturday marked International Holocaust Memorial Day. This is a solemn occasion every year, but this year the day carried even more significance following the October 7th rampage and the global rise of anti-Semitism once again.
A straight line connects Nazi ideology to genocidal jihadism. Both drove from the darkness of the Middle Ages, both terrorized by despicable brutality. Both use anti-Semitism and xenophobia to destroy the free world. Both lie as they breathe.
Israel's ambassador to Poland drew a direct link between the Nazi ideology and the Hamas ideology, speaking at the official ceremony marking 79 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp on International Holocaust Memorial Day.
Today, the generation of our children fights jihadi barbarism. On Simchat Torah holiday, the 7th of October, we saw what one day of the Holocaust might look like.
The ambassador said that now the world must not only remember, but must also act as the only Jewish state fights for its very existence. Meanwhile, the United Nations also held a ceremony on Friday honoring the victims and survivors. Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, criticized the World Organization, saying it had failed to learn the lessons of the Holocaust.
Hitler seared the meaning of genocide into our DNA. But on October 7th, Hamas tore open that wound. On International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the day that even the ICJ proved to the world that the lessons of the Holocaust were not learned, I stand here in the name of the State of Israel and in the name of all those murdered by the Nazis and Hamas, and I swear we will not forget. Never again is now.
Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Light rain is expected around most of the country tonight, with lows of around 9 degrees Celsius or 49 Fahrenheit. And then tomorrow, more rain showers in the north and temperatures reaching highs of about 15 degrees Celsius or 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's all the news for today. For more updates from Israel and all of your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all of the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Steve Leibowitz. Let's win this war and bring them home.